Catherine, you can unmute.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Hillary, and thank you to the JCC for allowing us to share this very special story and just a remarkable Wright design property. We refer to this as the Little Gem in Kirkwood, Missouri, and as a point of reference, Kirkwood is about 20 minutes outside of downtown St. Louis. So we are very cold in St. Louis, Missouri, just like I'm sure a lot of you participating in the program. Of course, we wish we were all here together in person so we could give you a live experience of this fabulous property, but I'm going to do my best to give you a up close and personal look at this wonderful Wright designed home that was cherished by its owners, lovingly restored by a group dedicated to its preservation, and of course, with the exception of this year, enjoyed by thousands of people every year, including students, with a incredible live tour experience. And we look forward to that happening again. And I would like to extend an invitation to all of you participating to, when it's safe to do so, come see this house and have a live tour. So first, let's pretend we've just driven up the winding road, which is eclipsed by trees, and we're making our way up to the house. And what we're going to do to start our program is give you a tour of the exterior of the Kraus house. And we may want to get rid of that geography in progress. That's in the middle of the screen.
It should be gone. One second.
Looks like there's a button end polling, but you probably tried that.
Eileen, can you see if you can end that, please?
If you fill it in, it'll go away.
I did end polling, but I'll here. Better?
I can still see.
I don't see anything. Catherine? It's Eileen, and I only see the house.
Good, we're all good now. Thank you.
Okay.
We're all good. Well, how about that? I hope you enjoyed that introduction to the house, which shows the complex geometry and just the beautiful views from every direction. But to start the story, it's only fitting that we introduce you to some very remarkable people, and those are Russell and Ruth Krauss, a couple very much in love, just starting their married life together. St. Louis native Russell Moreland Krauss was born to German immigrant parents. He studied fine arts at Washington University, taught art for a while, then held several government positions, including working for the Works Program Administration, or the WPA as we know it. Starting in 1948, he worked as a freelance commercial artist. Ruth Getz Krauss was a very impressive woman, one of the first women to graduate from the prestigious Washington University School of Law, excelling both academically and socially. She practiced law at a firm in St. Louis, and while on a WPA project met and ultimately married Russell Krauss. It's clear that Ruth's training as a lawyer, her outstanding communication skills, fierce determination, and resourcefulness were invaluable as she and Russell worked to make their plans for the Wright designed dream house become a reality. Little did they know that their high school yearbook pictures would be used so often. So I'd like to now talk about Russell's art for just a bit, since his work as an artist had a significant impact on the design of his home. Russell was a nationally recognized designer of tapestries, mosaics, jewelry, and liturgical glass. You're looking at a sample of Russell's work, including one of several WPA posters he created, that's on the left, a painting of a religious icon, and one of numerous liturgical stained glass windows he designed, which are installed in churches all over the country. Russell's liturgical glass designs have been something that we have been amazed at just how popular and how prolific they are all over not only the country, the world. You'll see another example of Russell's stained glass a little bit later. Russell's desire for his home to reflect his creative lifestyle was a major driving force behind his pursuit of a Wright designed residence. So, wanting a home conducive to a creative lifestyle was one thing, but what compelled a newly married couple with relatively little means to have the audacity to reach out to Frank Lloyd Wright, a world-renowned architect, to design it for them? Well, Russell had long admired the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, but he'd always thought his work was out of the realm of what he could afford. Then he read an article in the 1948 Home Beautiful magazine written by Lauren Pope called "The Love Affair of a Man with His House." So in this article that inspired Russell, Lauren Pope, who was a copy editor for the Washington Evening Star, who self-reported an annual salary of $3,000 a year. And in fact, he said on the shady side of $3,000 a year. And he wrote in glowing terms about the process of building a 1,200 square foot Wright designed house in Falls Church, Virginia, and the delight in living in it. So Pope's words inspired Krauss, who otherwise would be too inhibited to reach out to Frank Lloyd Wright, to contact him on August 25th. And he wrote to Mr. Wright, "Mr. Pope's story seems to have opened a whole new world for me. Before I read it, I thought none but the very affluent could hope to engage your services. Now I feel like a man who suddenly holds in his embrace the woman for years he could only worship from afar." 5 days later, Wright replied, "You shall have that nice little house of yours. Condense your needs and we will make you a plan." Despite this very timely response, which probably encouraged the Krauss to think that, wow, this is going to happen pretty soon, it took more than 7 years before the house was able to be lived in. So it just so happened that Mr. Wright had very much wanted to design homes for couples like the Krausses. He had long been interested in designing affordable houses on a massive scale for the American middle class. In 1901, he published designs for elegant, inexpensive suburban homes in several issues of the Ladies' Home Journal. Wright was also interested in urban planning. He began thinking seriously about that issue in the late 1920s and early 30s. Wright discussed his views in publications, lectures, and notably, The Disappearing City. He gave visual form to his ideas for a model environment in Broadacre City. The concept of Usonian homes was conceived at that time. While Broadacre City would not become a reality, the Usonian home with its signature organic elements, geometric influences, and affordable prices would. No doubt, most of you recognize what you're looking at in the middle of the screen, which is a picture of the Jacobs 1 house. The Jacobs house was based on a rectangular module, but Wright would later design square, hexagonal, triangular, and much to the Krause's delight, parallelogram-shaped units to generate floor plans. The modest cost, size, and materials of the Usonian home in the 1930s and early 40s reflected the limited budgets of prospective homeowners and the harsh economic realities of the Depression and the World War II years. After the war, as the economy improved and wartime restrictions on materials were lifted, the possibilities for the design of Usonian homes expanded. By the time Wright began to work on the Krause house, he had designed approximately 100 Usonian homes and had a dozen or more on the drawing board. The Krause house, however, would be one of his most distinctive and complex Usonian designs. So, with materials more accessible and Wright's success with complex geometric designs, the design phase of the Krause house was a piece of cake. I don't think so, no. That definitely was not the case. Like with other clients, Frank Lloyd Wright asked the Krauses for their likes and dislikes, and Wright responded quite immediately with his interpretation. But it took quite a bit of back and forth before they nailed down a design. After reviewing the plan you're looking at now, the Krauses advised Wright that they liked the overall design and arrangement of the rooms and the free flow from one room to another, but admitted to being disappointed. They expressed their disenchantment in a letter that stated, "It is difficult to feel justified in making any suggestion which in any way would alter the house that Mr. Wright would design for us. He is the world's greatest architect, and we fetishly worship his genius." But right after that humble and conciliatory preface, Russell went on to describe in a 4-page letter the alterations they desired, including more square foot, a bigger home essentially, a change in the location of his studio, and many other modifications. Another letter from Russell noted that the fresh appeal, the punch, and the rhythmatic charm of the original drawings are lost in the revisions. I don't know if I would have the tenacity to provide that honest, critical analysis of a Frank Lloyd Wright plan, but they did. Wright just responded, "This is quite an unusual situation. You better come here to Taliesin." After that personal meeting with Mr. Wright and the Krauses, they were again on cloud 9, confident that they were on the right path. A letter to Wright after their meeting with him at Taliesin noted, "You have been with us since we left Spring Green. We wish you everything good and beautiful and worthwhile. Mr. Wright, we love you." I don't know about all of you, but that's quite an emotional roller coaster. But they were just caught up in the desire to work with a genius and create this home and regain the confidence that they could do that. So the Krauses hung in there and finally landed upon a final design, which you see here. Changes were made, including moving the studio to the southeast, which Russell requested. It was located at the southeast end of the house, thereby elongating the parallelogram plan. Wright designed a triangular brick-walled terrace off the studio, sheltered by a soaring roof cantilever, one of the most dramatic features of the house. The workspace, which is the kitchen, and the utility room were reconfigured. To accommodate the changes, Wright shifted the carport to the east and reduced the size of the former studio, now called the tool house. He enlarged and reshaped the motor court to conform to the parallelogram geometry. The house had signature Usonian elements such as the geometric module, open floor plan, and no basement or attic, but it had unique features such as private spaces being located right off the main communal areas. These departures reflect customizations that fit the Krauses and demonstrated Mr. Wright's willingness to create unique designs to meet his clients' needs. There's a lot of discussion out there that Frank Lloyd Wright really wanted to tell his clients, how to live in a Wright design house. But from our experience here with the Krauses, what we know, he really was very responsive to wanting the Krauses to have the design that he felt best met their needs. So now the Krauses had a fabulous design in hand. So the construction phase, you'd think, would be a breeze. Well, you can tell by this gentleman's head in his hand that was not the case. So in August 1951, 3 years after the project's inception, the Krauses received working drawings for the house. So the next steps were to find a contractor and subcontractor and to secure the necessary building materials. Most builders, and this is a quote from Russell Krauss in his journal, wanted no part of it. One of the most challenging aspects of the design was the brickwork. Because the parallelogram-shaped module generated the floor plan, almost all the walls of the house met in 60-degree or 120-degree angles, requiring specially designed molds to create angled edges. Getting the steel they needed was also a problem. The Krauses lacked what most of the other Wright clients had, which was a Taliesin apprentice on site. So they had to struggle without assistance with a host of technical problems. Finally, in March 1953, they hired Lee Patterson. He's the man whose head is resting on his hands, looking exasperated or confused. And Russell would describe Lee as a fine young fellow who, while lacking formal training, had a lot of imagination. I don't know if many of you have built your own homes, but I don't know if that's really sort of the tagline, the bio that I would look for in a contractor. But Mr. Patterson turned out to be the right man for the job, hiring bricklayers and other laborers to work through the challenges of interpreting the plans, sourcing materials, and construction issues. I love that picture. So with other Wright clients, Russell and Ruth were very hands-on. You'll see Russell and Ruth. I love having that car in the background because it date stamps, it. So they were on site during the early stages of construction in 1952. Ruth was quite honestly she was the unsung hero in several of the construction issues, especially as it related to sourcing building materials. First, she found a solution to the angled brick. She identified Alton Brick Company as the manufacturer of the kind of brick they needed and convinced them to resurrect a retired mold to make the angled brick, red shale bricks, and she convinced them to do that at a pretty reasonable cost, I think $5 for 100 bricks. While the brick problem was resolved, other parts of construction remained mired in a morass of complications that the Krauses and Lee Patterson had to figure out. Tidewater red cypress in the quantity and dimensions required and aged to the optimal dryness was an elusive commodity. Ruth scoured the country to secure the wood they needed, contacting dozens of lumber companies and forestry associations about their cypress sources. Ruth Pugh, who with her husband John owned the Wright Design Pugh House in Madison, referred the Krauses to a builder and partner in a lumber firm who could provide most of the required lumber. Many other issues arose during construction that either caused delay or escalated costs, but one by one, the Krauses and their newly assembled construction team worked through them. So finally, on New Year's Day, 1956, the Krauses moved into their new home. here's a picture of the Krause house when it was completed, and it's shown with two of Ruth's horses. I might add, while we're on this picture, that while the Krauses worked tirelessly to complete their house, they also complicated the project by asking Wright to design additional features, including a 5-stall stable with tack room, loft, bunk room, kitchen, shower, lavatory, fireplace, and more. I think that as they got filled with and inspired by the potential of what Wright could design to enhance the house, they moved in different directions to pull in these different elements. So I think that was one of the things that made this project sort of become so I hate to use the word elongated, but that's what happened with the timeline. So you can imagine how giddy with delight the Krauses were to finally be in their home. But in reality, there were a lot of things that they still needed to complete, including the kitchen and much of the Wright designed furniture and furnishings. And they would add those things as they had the energy and motivation to do that. So let's take a look at sort of a final picture of Ruth and Russell Krause. These are paintings that are in the house, and Ruth passed away in 1992, and Russell sold the house to the nonprofit organization, which included a group of very committed preservation specialists. And I said this is a group of community people led by Joanne Cohn and a lot of other people who really were committed to preserving this house, the legacy of Wright in the region, and being able to share this remarkable story of the Krauses and the construction, preservation, and operation of the house. So I'd like to just before we move into the next phase, to share with you the words of the Krauses, which I think is really a good reflection on how they felt about this experience. Our house is as much a part of the locale as the creek bed and the trees, the wildflowers and the birds, looking for all the world as though it pushed its way right up out of the ground like the May apples and the morels. We love our house, Mr. Wright, love it passionately and intensely. To us, it is not an inanimate brick, mortar, and wood. To us, it is a personality, a thing that lives and breathes. And that was written by Ruth Krause. So as much as they had their ups and downs, they loved that house and lived in it for more than 40 years. So while they had taken great care of the house, when the nonprofit purchased it, there was a lot of maintenance that needed to be done. It was in need of significant restoration, and the nonprofit organization, the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park, recruited John Eifler from Chicago as lead architect of the restoration, and it took on a $300,000 project which focused on primarily the terrace, lanai, and motor court masonry. The exposed brick in these areas had deteriorated considerably and was needed to be completely replaced. And you can see how a lot of you can see all the work that needed to be done. Many of the exterior brick had to be essentially rebuilt. It just deteriorated too significantly, being exposed to the elements. There's a lot of our guests, I think, who toured the house that think that the organization sort of bought the house and opened the doors, a few weeks later, and that definitely was not the case. Other restoration work included the replacement of wood on the terrace doors, which received a lot of sun and water exposure. The interior of the home was quite well preserved, and mostly restoration involved cleaning and restoring surfaces and textiles. In order to open the house to the public, the driveway was widened and a small parking lot was added. Now I'd like to take you back to a different view of the Krause house floor plan. So we're gonna give you a tour, but before we do that, we think it's really important for you to see the flow, what the geometry does to create a very unique and important flow of the house. So we start at the driveway and enter through the motor court, and you're going to be passing a series of small windows on your left-hand side. So when you enter the entry hall, you make your way into the main living space. The hallway, the gallery is rather small, and in the words of Frank Lloyd Wright, you feel a degree of compression until you are released into the larger living space. What we're looking at now is a combined living dining room, and you'd be looking out onto the terrace with these large stained glass windows, light screens flooding the living area with just beautiful images of the stained glass design and light. If you want to go, you may be coming in from a long day, you want to take a nap, so you'll go into the master bedroom, and you can see that there is a terrace or a lanai off of the master bedroom. That was important to the Krauses. They wrote Frank Lloyd Wright and thought the master bedroom should have every focus that the living and dining room should have. They thought it was a room of great importance. There's a master bath off of the master bedroom, and then if you walk out of the master bedroom, which by the way does not have a door, and there are no no walls that go all the way up to the ceiling, you can see the study or the second bedroom now. And then you will make your way back out into that long gallery. And now we are going into the kitchen, or the workspace as Frank Lloyd Wright referred to it, which very customarily is right off of the main living area. You're seeing sort of this bonus room. This was originally designed as a utility space, but the Krauses decided to expand their kitchen area. And then this is Russell's studio. So he was a working artist. He did work from home. He had an area that had a fireplace, a terrace. It had a bathroom that was right outside the studio, and he could have clients come in and not sort of disrupt the other things that were going on in his family life. Okay. I hope that was helpful, but the flow is something you feel when you're there in person, so we thought it was important for you to get a sense of that. So right with this image, we've just entered the house. This is the view of the gallery looking towards the guest room. At the entry, the ceiling is low, a compressed space. On the right is a series of windows with gallery shelves extending the entire length of the wall. When you look down the hallway, you see the full length of the house. Again, it's giving you a sense of being in a much larger space than you actually are in. And you can see in this picture how that Tidewater red cypress just puts off a warm and welcoming glow as you're making your way into the house. So after you walk down this hallway, you are released, or you're moved into the living dining room area, which is the largest room in the house. Light through the terrace stained glass panels illuminate the room, and on sunny days, the design, which Russell Krause designed, you're not going to see stained glass in any other Usonian home, but the Krause house was able to have it because Russell was a stained glass artist, and he actually asked for approval from Taliesin to install this particular design. So on a sunny day, you can see almost a mirror image of that in this picture on the floor and on the furniture. On this picture, you can also see one of the origami chairs and other Wright design furniture. The view of the living room provides a view of many of the Usonian characteristics of the house. Here you can easily see the parallelogram grid that is the basis of the floor plan. The blueprints are actually based on a 4x4 foot parallelogram rather than square footage that would normally be the case. You can see angles and lines of that grid that are carried up from the floor and onto the walls and shelving. One of the ways Wright tried to keep Usonians affordable was the use of limited materials and to use the same natural materials inside and out. The Tidewater red cypress, brick, and concrete floor in Wright's trademark Cherokee red are something you'll see inside and outside of the house. The concrete floors are usually in Usonians, and as is the case here, they often included radiant floor heating or gravity heating, as Wright called it. We're very fortunate that in the heating system, in this house, the heating system still functions. And students, of course, are delighted when they come through the house. We tell them they can sit on the floor or take off their shoes, and they feel that radiant heat and just are spellbound. It was also typical of Wright not to install air conditioning, but rather use the deep overhangs to provide shade and a lot of windows to create cross breezes. Unfortunately, for the Krauses, these methods did not really help. The St. Louis heat waves in the summer were causing a problem. So finally, they added air conditioning after trying a couple of Wright design solutions, including a shade, and they installed the curtains that you see in this picture. But ultimately, they installed air conditioning. But it was quite a bit of time after the house was built. And it works quite well. We're very grateful for that decision about air conditioning to be made. Here's another view of the light screens. Again, that's Wright's terminology. And it's a reference to the influence of Asian architecture from his time spent in Japan. The floor-to-ceiling glass allows daylight to spill onto the interior and connect interior spaces to the natural beauty of the site. This is the view facing west, where you can look out onto the large terrace, commonly referred to as the prow. In classic Wright design, the terrace expands the living room space by adding an outdoor room that adds to the relatively small square footage of the house. And it forges a close connection between interior and exterior space. Since the house is sited into a persimmon grove, the view of the natural beauty around the house is always stunning. The persimmons are a native Missouri tree and produce a small apricot-sized fruit in the fall, which Russell described in this way. In the autumn, you can see thousands of orange balls against the blue sky. It is absolutely spectacular. Now, if you ask our docents, they may have a different idea, because there's so many of those persimmons that fall onto the terrace, and it's their responsibility to take care of that so our guests don't step on them. Like other arts and crafts architects, Wright liked to design much of the furniture for his clients, and we can see the influence, again, of his time in Japan in the furnishings here. Russell Krauss, who in addition to being a talented artist was a skilled craftsman, and he enlisted the help of his father to construct much of the furniture following Wright's design, including the dining room table, the octagon, hassocks, and shelves. Some of the pieces were constructed off-site and brought into the house. Now, this is one of my favorites. You ask a lot of people on a tour what their favorite element is. You get a lot of different answers, but this always strikes me as quite magical when the light brings the design and colors of the stained glass into the house, and they spill onto the floor and furniture. It's just a beautiful effect. Now we enter the master bedroom from the living room. You'll notice that there's no door. Well, I don't know if you can tell, but there is no door. Just like if you're there in person, you can move easily into the bedroom. And typically, Wright separates private and public spaces of the house. But in this case, the master bedroom is right off the living and dining room. And that was quite fine for the Krauses. And so, this is one of the more unique or non-standard elements, relative to other Usonian homes. You can see the built-in desk with a mitered window above it and built-in closets with piano hinge doors. On the left, you see the second terrace or lanai, which has taller walls for greater privacy. The glass panel doors leading out to the terrace have the same glass design as in the living room. And now you can see the master bed, which is parallelogram shaped and conforms to the geometry of the house. The custom mattress was made by a hospital supply company, and the bedspread, and in fact all the textiles in the house, were selected by The Krauses and Cornelia Brierly, a Taliesin fellow who flew to St. Louis to help the Krauses put the finishing touches on the interior of their home. And this is right here, one of the best views of, I think, one of the coolest elements of this house, which is the sort of ceiling-scape. So here you're looking at this dramatic ceiling-scape where 5 different ceiling planes converge into an origami-like folded wood composition. So it's beautiful, but you can imagine how difficult this was for carpenters, the builders, to figure out. In fact, that was the most difficult part, but it's absolutely a stunning effect. At the end of the gallery, we're going to go to the second bedroom, which is at the end of the gallery. And again, the geometry informs everything in the room, including the bed, which is an elongated hexagon. There is storage and a second full bath in the hallway. The picture you see above the bed is one of Russell's paintings. As mentioned before, Russell worked in many mediums and wanted the many shelves you see on the gallery and in the rooms to be a place where he could display his artwork and collections. And we do have a couple other of Russell's paintings in the house. This was one of his early works. We're now returning to the living room, and we see the kitchen sort of right center, or the workspace as Wright referred to it. Wright understood that the more modest income clients of a Usonian would not have domestic help, so he created a more connected and open space for family members to spend more time together. The large dominant hearth is typical Usonian element. Mr. Wright was particularly fond personally of dining in front of a fireplace, and he also, encouraged his clients to do the same. So the dining table is modular and movable. So if the Krauses would desire to move the dining room table somewhere else, or any of the furniture somewhere else, they could do that. As we enter the kitchen, we notice, unlike the other areas of the house, which are primarily tidewater red cypress, the counters are maple and the cabinets are birch. There's a corner window to the right. You can't see it very well in this picture, but it provides a view of the persimmon grove and is similar in design to the well-known tower windows at Falling Water. What you also can't see is a skylight that creates light and vertical volume to an otherwise small kitchen. When you sort of turn the corner, you see this. Originally, because we have the original designs, this was originally designed to be a utility space, but having that space house a boiler, water heater, washer and dryer, that would be a lot of noise and activity and disruption to the kitchen. So in the construction phase, the Krauses decided that they would not do that and instead dig out a small basement for utilities, which they did, under this space right here. So this resulted in an expanded kitchen with another skylight, which provides light and a sense of openness. The air conditioning system that was added in the 70s is housed in the space above the refrigerator. You can sort of see it center left. So they found a space that they could put that air conditioning in. So when we walk out of the kitchen, we make a right turn and we enter Russell's studio, located at the opposite end of the house from the second bedroom. With a half bath next to it, the studio is separated from the main living space, so Russell could work without disturbing his wife, Ruth, while she was in the living space of the home. The cantilever over the terrace was added during the design revisions and is constructed with a steel beam. The mitered window helps create an unobstructed view of the landscape and wildlife. With the large skylight, this is the brightest room of the house and an exceptional space that no doubt was an environment that fostered Russell's creativity. So, to conclude, I would like to show a video of the house, which will show a combination of interior and exterior, and hopefully will give you a sense of more of a sense of what it's like to be there in person. Well, that is it. So, Hillary, I would be happy to answer any questions, any feedback. If you would like to open it up, that would be
Yep,
fun.
we definitely have some questions. Let's see. When
And
exactly, what year was the home completed and how much did it cost to build?
that's a good question. It's a hard question. The Krauses moved in on New Year's Day, 1956, but they did move in without a lot of the interior spaces being completed. But that's sort of that's the number we use because they were being able to live in the home after great anticipation and sleep there. But they did continue to work on the house after that.
So the kitchen wasn't complete when they moved in? Is that
Correct.
correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the projection. So when the Krauses and Frank Lloyd Wright were corresponding, there's a number of documents that show that Russell was really reinforcing that $35,000 was the max he could spend, and when he asked for Frank Lloyd Wright to revise it and maybe figure out a way to add to the house, it was with the caveat that it could not exceed $35,000. But the reality is, the Krauses did participate in really getting inspired, in the design process and wanting new and different things. So Russell has shared with the folks that are part of the organization that it ended up being a lot more than that.
More than the 20% that they tell you when you're constructing something?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think Russell might say keep going up from that 20%, but we don't know for sure.
Janice is asking, which of the furniture would you say is actually comfortable? And I do have to agree with Janice that didn't look very comfortable.
Well, yeah, form function, it's always sort of this struggle with, the really cool designs aren't always the most comfortable. Well, what I'll say is, the origami chair did have some issues, and the design later got tweaked so it didn't tip. And we have some folks on this call. If I would disclose that I've actually sat in one of those chairs, I might get in trouble. But I have sat in one of them, the origami chair, and they aren't bad. But I mean, it takes a pretty you have to be able to get out of it, and that's the tricky part. Now the crowds, we know, when we did the restoration. The strategic thinking was you always have to create and be committed to a certain interpretation. Our interpretation is to really feature the architecture, the design. We do talk about the Krauses, we do talk about the influence of mid-century design, but the organization really wanted to focus and really have museum quality standards so that the features of the architecture and design could be very visible. When we see pictures of the Krauses in the house, there were additional furniture. They had a lazy boy. So I think that to answer your question, it's not the most comfortable, but darn it, it's beautiful. So that's my answer.
If everyone could please put their questions in the chat box. We have too many people on the call to actually let anyone unmute. So the next question is from Beth, and she asks if you could talk about the name of the house, because it's usually named after the owners. Many of Frank Lloyd Wright's houses are named after the owners, and this is not.
You're right. This is the Krause House, but the current legal entity name is the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park, and we were able to essentially save this house and property because of a very generous support from Mr. Barney Ebsworth, and it was important to him. I mean, one of the impetus for the donation was to honor his parents. And so the generous donation and the renaming of the house had to do with it being, part of a tribute gift. But we still use the Krause House name often, but the legal entity is the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Ebsworth Park, and you're absolutely right. That is not similar to other houses which retain the original owner name.
Yes. Helen would like to know, how did they find or buy that piece of land?
Great, all great questions. Well, you know, fortunately, when we purchased the house, just to back up a little bit, what was included was the house, the property, and paper collections. And in those paper collections, we have significant information about sort of from the very beginning of this process, purchasing of land, and sort of how that evolutionary process happened. And when the Krauses were looking to do something, they had their eye on different parcels in different places. They sort of viewed themselves, Russell as a gentleman farmer, Ruth was an avid gardener. So they pursued a couple pieces of property that didn't work out. And when they wrote to Frank Lloyd Wright, he said, buy as much property as far away from the city as you can. You know, condense your needs and send me what you end up with. And so they ended up with this after several sort of other properties that for whatever reason didn't seem right, or they didn't work out, or they couldn't get a clean deed. As it turns out, in Kirkwood, Missouri, that's why I was curious where everybody was. It's just a really beautiful community, Kirkwood is, but in particular, this property is in Sugar Creek Valley, which is just the perfect setting. So of course, when the Krauses bought it, they bought it as, you know, a farm, part of a larger farm. And so as expected, you know, neighborhoods development really encroached on all areas. But fortunately, the community, there's 10 acres around the house, and there's just a green screen. There's trees all around. So in the dead of winter, you can maybe see an outline of homes, but it's still very protected with nature all around it. And then the community around it is modern homes, a very artistic community. So it couldn't have landed in a better community.
The house is pretty small, so we're assuming, and Eileen is asking if the Krauses had children.
They did not have children. And so a lot of the things that might make this impractical for a couple expecting or with a family, you know, they could eliminate the doors. They could they could live in a home that the ceilings didn't go all the way up. And so they could have this amazing flow because they didn't have some of the practical limitations. And then also, I mean, I'm not an architect, but a lot of the times if a family wrote to Frank Lloyd Wright and wanted him to design a home, knowing that their family would expand, the design would take that into consideration, and Frank Lloyd Wright would identify different ways that the house could be built, additional bedrooms built, or the expansion of the home. I think it would have been difficult to do that.
Michelle is asking if there's an inventory of Usonian Wright houses.
There is an inventory. There is an inventory, and I think that if you go onto the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy site, you can find a roster. But I have many places to grab that list, and I can send that to you, Hillary, so people can explore that. Also, we participated in a program that was a collaborative between all the many of the Frank Lloyd Wright public sites, and it was called the Wright Virtual Visits, where we would swap video tours. And so there is a place that you can go and you can literally tour many similar and some very different. You know, Falling Water is very different than this, you know, modest sized Usonian home, but there are peer Usonian homes, and it's fun. There's one on our website, and that's another great resource for everybody participating in this call to go to our website, because we do have an archive of the video tours, both of ours and others. And there's one where we are on a video tour, but we're toggling back with another Usonian home, comparing and contrasting the different elements. So there's a lot of ways to learn about and have tours of these remarkable homes. And again, as much as these share similar attributes, they're customized in really unique and interesting ways. So if you have that interest, I would encourage you to do that.
And the JCC actually has a great library of tours that were specifically designed for the JCC, and those are on our YouTube channel. So I will drop that link into the chat. But let's see what else we have. Ellen wants to know, how involved was Frank Lloyd Wright in the construction and after planning? Issues when he gave the owners the plans? Did he stay in contact?
Well, yes. Again, we're so fortunate to have Russell, who took meticulous notes of the correspondence, and we also have when Russell would write to Taliesin, it would be logged in, and correspondence back would be logged in. So we have every single piece of correspondence back and forth from 1948 to 1958, and so we're really rich in that insight. So Frank Lloyd Wright and Taliesin was very responsive right from the beginning, responding with plans, and there was a lot of back and forth. You know, as I shared with you, because I think it's interesting that sort of the twists and turns of this story. You know, it wasn't straightforward. The Krauses really stood up for what they wanted, so there was a lot of back and forth in the design phase. They went to Taliesin. Russell and Ruth went to Taliesin at least twice. While they didn't have a Taliesin apprentice there the whole time, which was pretty standard, they did have Taliesin architects come routinely to check on things and answer questions about the design. And Frank Lloyd Wright he traveled. This was Frank Lloyd Wright passed in 1959. During this period, he was designing this house. He was involved in the Guggenheim. I mean, he was really at the peak of his career and quite productive, but he still stayed connected to this property. And again, they asked, for solutions for the heat in the living room. They asked for the design of a pond. They asked for design of a pretty sophisticated horse stable. And each time, Frank Lloyd Wright, or one of his key apprentices, responded. And there's cards where the Krauses sent pears as a holiday gift to Frank Lloyd Wright. So there's no doubt that despite this architect being world famous and working on significant commissions, still being committed to this $35,000, Usonian home, he wanted to make his clients happy, and the Krauses were very much advocates for what they wanted. I hope that answers the question.
We have a couple more questions. What is the square footage of the house itself?
It's 1,900 square feet.
Let's see. Did they do anything with the beautiful orange balls on the trees? Are they edible?
Well, I don't know if they did anything. I know that they admired it. And again, Russell was such a Renaissance man, truly, and an artist in spirit. So that's why I wanted to share in his words, how he described them. So I think visually they just added to the aesthetics. Now, the docents, who are just such they're the heart and soul of this this property and the visitors experience. So we have 4,000 plus hundreds of students coming, and our volunteer docents take visitors through an hour and a half story, and the docents themselves have made persimmon jam. There's been some persimmon infused vodka and bourbon, which is always a big deal. But I don't know if the Krauses did anything with it. I would imagine, based on what I know from them, from getting to know them through what I read, I bet I wouldn't be surprised if they just ate them like a fruit. You know, they were all about sort of sourcing from the ground, and I think they just enjoyed them aesthetically and probably just enjoyed them as a fruit.
Is the house as you have it right now how they actually would have lived? It seems a little bit stark. Or is
Well,
that the museum kind of thing you're going for?
exactly. I mean, again, you know, when you have a house museum or a historic property, you have to make a decision about how you're interpreting it. So we could interpret this exactly the way the Krause lived in it. The Krauses had a TV, they had a lazy boy chair. Russell, with his amazing gift as an artist, had his collections. He made a hand carved holiday ornaments that were displayed, and he wrote a poem with each one. He had books, he had contemporary art. So it doesn't look like necessarily how they lived in it. So our focus, how we interpret it, is mostly on how Frank Lloyd Wright designed it and the design and architecture. But the docents and bringing people into the story do talk about the Krauses, and they do talk about how mid-century architecture influenced this. And they also talk about, you know, Frank Lloyd Wright. An important part of our mission is to really promote the legacy of Frank Lloyd Wright in the region through the experience of this house. So yeah, there's and then also just the ability, we have the ability to, you know, manage the house and maintain the house in a way that you know, Russell in his 80s was not able to. So when we purchased the property, the nonprofit organization raised money, purchased the house, objects, furnishings, the property, and the paper collections, and they immediately deeded it to St. Louis County. And then we operated it as a house museum. So we have help, you know, the county helps with, you know, mowing the grass and snow removal, so we can keep it this tidy. And we have myself, and I want to acknowledge on this call Lydia Nunes, who's, I don't know if you can see her picture, but she's running the technology, and Lydia and myself were the staff, and you know, we're able to sort of maintain the house and keep it to the museum quality standards that people living in a home probably wouldn't be able or choose to do.
This is one of the simpler houses, I think, that we've visited throughout the last year or so. So thank you so much, Catherine, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I did drop the link to the JCC Chicago website YouTube channel, so you can go back and see maybe some of the programs that you missed. You can also visit our website at jccchicago.org. We'll be doing a tour of the synagogues of the west side of Chicago on Thursday, so we hope you'll join us for that. Thank you again, Catherine and Lydia. Great job with the tech. Thank you so much. Everyone have a great day. Take care and be well. Thank you.
Thank you.